Hello everybody, this is project 3, drums, bass, and we're going to do the musicianship elements of this assignment. So unlike the previous assignment, we're now dealing with pitch, and as soon as we do that, we have to talk a little bit about scales, a little bit of music theory, and my goal is to teach you music theory almost without you knowing about it. Keep it painless and very simple and very functional. So the purpose of today's lesson is to get enough in there so that we can start to experiment with bass lines, but understand that we need to play within a key, and try to show you a couple of basic scales that are really helpful for creating a bass line. So let's start with this. Bass is an instrument that plays the lowest notes of an ensemble, okay? So I happen to have one right here. Yay. So this bass is tuned down to, that low E there on the piano. And so if you kind of look at the piano as a whole instrument here, the whole 88 key piano, we really divide it into 3 areas. We've got the lower third, the middle third, the upper third. And just kind of generally speaking, understanding that we do have some overlaps, the bass lives kind of down here in the bottom. The harmony or the chords live here in the middle. And usually the melody is above that. They can commingle and they can, switch places sometimes. But generally speaking, it's bass, harmony, melody. Okay? So just by definition, for something to be a bass line, it needs to live down here. And that's kind of where this instrument lives. It lives in the lower register of a piano, okay? So that's the first thing, is that we're going to concentrate on the low end of the keyboard, the low end of frequency. And when we notate this on the staff, we use, a different clef. So we're probably used to seeing the treble clef, and I'm going to do a full sort of a piano staff here. So treble clef is up there. That's where we notate things like melodies. And then the bass clef is down here. So that first note that I played for you on the bass guitar is an E, one ledger line below the bass clef. That's where it is. So that's pretty low on the staff, right? And the names of the notes in the bass clef are different than the ones in the treble clef. So typically we start with the bottom line, and we would say things like, good boys do fine always, or whatever you want to come up with. And then for the spaces, it's all cars eat gas, or all cows eat grass. So you can kind of work on learning where the notes are on the staff. It's good to know how to read the bass clef too. That's not, the primary goal of this assignment, to get you reading bass clef, but I just want you to get the sense that this is where the notes live. They live on the lower part of the piano. They live on the bottom of the staff, and that's kind of the area that we're dealing with right now. Okay, so cool. We've got bass clef, notes in the bass clef. Let's talk a little bit about where scales come from, or where the idea of key comes from. So essentially, if we were to play, let's say, all the white notes on a piano, and I'm going to start down here in the bass clef because that's kind of our discussion for now. I'm going to play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And what that would sound like, okay, so it's basically starting on this C in the bass clef, and I'm just playing all the white notes up to the next octave. Okay, and that's what it looks like written on the staff. So when we play those 7 notes, we call it a scale. And a scale is just a collection of notes. It could be many different varieties of collections of notes, but in this case, it's these collections of notes. And I don't need to get into how it's formed or what the intervals are right now. We're going to let it go. We're just going to say, hey, just the white notes on the piano starting on a C. And if we number those, we can see that there's basically 7 notes, and the 8th note is really the same as the first because it's also a C. So we have 7 notes plus an octave. And I like using numbers because when we learn scales by number, we can easily transpose from one scale to another and just think about it in terms of number as opposed to always worrying about the pitches or the names of the notes. So this is a good example of a numbered scale. It's a C scale, and we've numbered the notes in the scale, and it's good to number them because there's a lot of things that we can talk about in music theory that relate to a position within a scale, and each one of these notes has a different function. So maybe the next thing that I would do after writing the scale is I would say that these notes now become the material, the raw material for the song. And when we write a song, we want to use pretty much the same notes to write the chords, the melody, the bass lines. They all come from the same pool of resources, in this case, this C major scale. Now, of course, there's times when we kind of break the rules or we go outside of the scale. You know, that of course that happens. But if I'm just talking in a very simple manner, let's say for now that we're only going to use the notes that come from the scale as the raw material to make up everything that we do. Okay, so if I were to build harmony on top of these notes, these numbered notes, then I would simply add 2 more notes stacked in thirds above each one of these scale degrees. And here's what it would look like. Okay, so I'm kind of running out of room there in the bass clef. But you can see that there's a pattern, which is basically that I'm just stacking the notes on top of each other, every other line or space, kind of like a snowman. And if I were to play this on the keyboard, it would sound something like this. All right. So now we have chords which have been constructed from that same set of raw material. All of the notes that I used to complete these chords come from that scale. There's no new notes here, none. They're all just the white notes on the piano. So here we've created a scale, we've created chords built on the scale, and all of those notes that you see actually come from just that one scale. So quick anatomy of a chord. And I know it sounds like we're talking a lot about harmony, which we kind of are, but we just need to understand how the bass is going to function within a group, within an orchestration, and the fact that it relates very much to the harmony that we play, or the chords. So each one of these chords right now has 3 notes, and if I were to fill in the bottom note, kind of hard to see because I didn't make them very big. That bottom note of the chord we call the root. And the bass's number 1 function in any ensemble is to play the root. That's its most important function. And the reason is that the root is the thing that really defines what the harmony is. If you change the root, the harmony can become something else. So let me give you a quick demonstration. So here we have that C chord. And I'm just going to invert it, move this one up to the top, and play it this way. Okay, it's still a C chord. So if I play the C on the bottom, it's a C major chord. But interestingly, if I move my left finger from the C down to an A, it becomes something else, right? It sounds really different, even though if you notice my right hand didn't change at all. It's literally the same 3 notes. Here's the C chord. Here's the A chord, right? So now we're playing A minor 7. Interesting. What if I go down to an F? Now we're playing something else, right? So now we're kind of playing like an F major 9 chord. So the root, whatever's on the bottom, fundamentally changes the harmony. So that if you want this to be a C chord, you really need to play a C in the root. So that's the primary function of the bass, is to play the root of the chord. And it helps the listener understand, what is the harmony, and it establishes that fundamental note that we can kind of latch onto, and then we can put things on top of it. Okay? All right, so now we know that primary function of the bass. It is possible within a piece of music for the bass to play something other than the root, and we'll give you some options for that. But mostly what they're going to play is, first of all, the root, and then probably some other part of the chord. So if this is a C chord, and these are my 3 notes, we have the root, the third, and the fifth. The bass is primarily going to play the root, okay? But it could play the third or the fifth. And sometimes it plays like the root and the fifth, right? But notice that I started with the root first. So I can go down to that fifth as part of a bass line, but primarily I start with that. So we're going to find that there's all kinds of interesting ways to kind of fill in the holes of time, playing notes that are not the root, but that kind of lead us where we want it to go. Okay? Cool. Let's get to the next idea, which is a different kind of a scale. All right, so here we had our C major scale. And that's got all the white notes from C to C. And it has a particular sound. Some people would say that it sounds kind of happy. What if we were to reduce the number of notes and not play 7 plus the octave? I'll get rid of the octave. And we just chose a few of these notes to play. Well, there is a type of scale that does exactly that. And it looks kind of like this. So now the notes that we're playing from the C scale are the 1, the 2, the 3. We left out the 4. We're going to play the 5 and the 6. We call this a pentatonic scale. Penta just means 5, and tonic means sounds or notes. So it's a 5-note scale. So this pentatonic scale, which is derived from the major scale, we call a major pentatonic, and it sounds like this. Right? Very common in the world. We hear this in many, many cultures around the world. And of course, you can go down below, up above. You can do any sort of combination of these notes. And what's cool about it is that it's kind of hard to play a wrong note, actually. So that's kind of nice. All right, so we've got our major pentatonic scale, and that would be a great source of notes to come up with a bass line for this project. If it sounds a little too happy for you, I can give you another option. So let me show you what a C minor scale looks like. All right, here we have a C minor scale, and I'll play it up on the octave so that you can look at the board and hear it at the same time. Right, sounds very different from major. Minor. So the minor pentatonic scale is just a 5-note scale that's derived from the minor scale, but we're going to leave out different notes this time. So this time we're going to leave out this 2, we're going to play the 3, the 4, the 5, we're going to leave out the 6, and we'll play that flat 7, and then the C is really the same as the 1, right? So now we have 5 notes. This is 1, flat 3, 4, 5, and that's flat 7. Okay, so there's a C minor pentatonic scale, and it sounds kind of like this. Played one slightly wrong note, but it wasn't too bad. All right, so this is the scale that I decided to use in my example for this project. I'm going to play a C minor pentatonic scale. And there's kind of two approaches that you can take on the project. You can choose to come up with a chord progression, which simply means you play a set of chords and you progress, right? I think the example I gave in class was to play like 1, 4, 5, right? So you could follow a chord progression, and then the bass would function to play the roots of those chords. Another option is to play a vamp, where you're basically playing one chord, maybe a C minor chord, and then you're coming up with a bass vamp that fits with that one chord. And this is pretty common, actually. In fact, I mean, if you listen to reggae music, a lot of times it's one or two chords, and the whole theme of the song is really centered around the bass line. The bass line is the thing that really makes it interesting, and that's where a lot of the creativity comes in. You know, funk music is the same way. It might sit on one chord for a very long time, but the bass player is playing an incredible bass line that really sort of defines, you know, what the song sounds like. So so that's the other option, is to play a vamp rather than to follow a chord progression. So going back to the bass. So for the bass example that I played on the bass, I'm basically using just that C minor pentatonic, and I started with the flat 7 to the 1. D, 4, D, D, and that sounds good by itself. Then I added like a 4, 5, 2, and then a walk up, right, where I came from here, basically walking up to that note, to the E, and going back to, and then at the end, another walk, E, F, F sharp, G. And basically those are all just chromatic notes, meaning that we're playing every note on the keyboard and sort of walking up to the 5. And the 5 is really important in music, in harmony and bass lines, because the 5 we call the dominant note. And the dominant note always takes us home to the tonic note. Right? So at the end of the line, I play and then I just use the flat 7 to get back to 1. But it's really just kind of a transition note. Okay? So what I'm going to show you now on the computer is how I took this idea and I sequenced it in MIDI. And then I said, well, let's go a step further and let's pretend that this is the pre-production for an actual song. So I have the music theory. I think, okay, C minor pentatonic. Let's come up with a basic idea for what I'm going to play. Then let's realize it in MIDI and create a MIDI sequence where I can sort of put my ideas together and hear what they sound like. And then let's get it with the musicians, which in this case is just me, and let's play it. Let's actually bring it to life on instruments and see what we can do to bring the bass line and the drummer together. Because that's another element of the project where we have to come up with a drum groove that fits with, that collaborates with, that complements the rhythm of the bass line. So that's what you're going to see in the next couple of videos.